let's start with the SEC West because I think this might get you going a little bit. I saw an article yesterday. You guys may have even posted it. Texas A&M's getting a lot of love right now.
Yeah.
A lot of love. And they're on South Carolina schedule. Obviously, Gamecocks have lost 6 straight to them. But A&M's getting a lot of love. And this is kind of – I want your take on the entire SEC West race.
Yeah.
But Reese Davis has Texas A&M ranked 4th. And then I talked to your buddy Michael Bratton, SEC Mike. He's got Texas A&M winning the West. What's your overall take on the West as a whole? And then just – I mean, do you think – listen, I think A&M with Jimbo Fisher, I mean, they have the facilities. They have the talent. You know, maybe this is the year. Maybe they're this year's LSU and it all comes together. But what's your thoughts on the love they're getting this preseason?
First off, I love Mike.
He's not afraid of the bold take. I think he was the one that said last year South Carolina was going to win 10 games, and I told him, I was like, hey, I love that optimism. Thank you for that. But, whatever.
and Mike is like it's always funny too because like again like this is all coming from a place of love. Mike is one of my favorite people. He's a great follow. He's a guy that I honestly butted heads with when I first started because he's so sarcastic and and he's hilarious. He's hilarious and he knows his shit honestly better than me and better than anyone else we work with at SDS. And so when we first started like having back and forth, I was like, this guy is an a-hole and he's constantly saying these things that are so outrageous and it gets under people's skin. But he can back it up with actual things a lot of times with his knowledge of the game. So that being said, Mike also said Bama's going to lose 3 or 4 games this year. I don't see that happening. I think I get a lot of flack because I'm a Bama homer or whatever. And people are very quick to forget that I picked Clemson to beat Bama as early as October in 2018. I think that the stuff with the hype with A&M, I think is real. I think it was more real before the schedule change. And when you look at a 12-game schedule and Clemson's not on it and Georgia's not on it, especially 2 games on the road, I loved A&M in the top 10, especially. I still do like them in the top 10. They returned 17 starters. Kellen Mond's in year 3 at Jimbo Fisher. I think it's for whatever reason, Kellen Mond and A&M are so polarizing to SEC fans, and I don't really understand why, because people just do not want to give that kid credit that, he's going to be a disappointment. I'll tell you what.
I've given him the benefit of the doubt since he threw for 400 against Clemson. People come at me because they're like, dude, he's so overrated. I'm like, that game to me, I'm like, he's a gamer, bro. He is a gamer. That's what I feel like about him.
I agree. And he's had his struggles for sure. And I think he kind of regressed a little bit last year, but I tell you what, it's easy to sit here and say from, 30,000 feet, looking down this whole thing, I tell you what, he regressed. His numbers weren't as good as they were as a sophomore. He's obviously overrated. He's not, the hype's not worth it, all that kind of stuff. At Clemson, Bama at home, at LSU, at Georgia, and I'm forgetting somebody that was also a top 10 team. I don't know how. But, I mean, that schedule last year was ridiculous. Yeah. And they don't have to face those teams again. So going 7-5 with that schedule, it's kind of what I said with South Carolina last year to an extent is, where's the ceiling and where are your expectations? And are they lining up? And I think with Texas A&M, I think they're going to be a very good team. I've said before the season, and honestly, I don't know how I feel about it now because of the way the schedule's set up, but I think going into November, Kellen Mond will be in position to be a Heisman finalist. And I'm not saying he will be by the time December rolls around, but especially before they added these games from the conference-only schedule, the way that schedule lined up, they could easily have been 10-0 going into their last 2 games, which were LSU and Bama. I think, again, year 3 of Jimbo, returning all of those starters, and then also having people around him with experience. He lost a couple of go-to guys at receiver, but he also returns, a lot of talent at the skill positions around him. And what no one's talking about, you think about how big this was a couple of years ago with Jay Sorensen, the tight end. The kid they have coming in, Baylor Cupp, who's the number 1 tight end in the country 2 years ago, he's coming off an injury. He was so missed last year, even as a true freshman, so he was out for the entire season. I think Kellen Mond, when you look at his body of work and being the only quarterback in the SEC to average 3,500 total yards, 30 touchdowns over 2 seasons.
Most veteran quarterback, too. He's a veteran.
He is – everyone wants to hit on him. He is already in the top 20 all-time in the SEC in total touchdowns, total passing yards, and I think maybe one more stat. But I think Kellen Mond is going to be a lot better this year. And I'm not up there with Reese Davis. I don't know what that is, top 4 at all. I don't think they're going to win the SEC West, but I do think it's a team that's going to win 8 games.
Do you think, because I'm assuming you have Alabama winning the West, correct?
Yes.
Do you think they are their biggest challenger, or would it come from Auburn or LSU?
So that's also a good question. I think I would say it's probably somebody like Auburn. That game against Auburn, they threw it in at the very end of the season. That didn't do Auburn or A&M any favors because you get Bama early, and they usually play Bama pretty early in the season. And it's one of those things ever since 2012 where both teams I feel like kind of have that one circled a little bit. Going into the way the schedule is now, they close the season, and I'm trying to think. I don't have it in front of me either, but they close the season. I know Bama plays Auburn in like week 10, so like the second to last game. The following week, Auburn plays A&M, and that is such a pivotal matchup to figure out like how everything falls in place in the SEC West, like in terms of standings. I again did not do either one of those teams any favors by putting it last. I think Auburn will be a little bit more of I don't want to say a test, but a little bit a better barometer for where A&M is going to be this season. Because whether you like it or not, and I'm not saying this because I'm a Bama fan, I bring that up just so, I always say it's like one of my many flaws, but I am as objective as possible with it. Those games against Bama haven't really been that close outside of the Manziel years. There was one a couple years ago that I think was an 8-point win or something like that. But like other than that, they haven't really ever been close in those games. And I think a team like Auburn, especially since it's on the road in Jordan-Hare, it's gonna be a lot more difficult for A&M.
Yeah, just to compare, Alabama closed the season against Arkansas, so I would certainly take that matchup over the A&M matchup for sure. And I will say this: I'm picking Alabama in the West as well, and people might go with, "Oh, it's boring." A&M, you don't get rich betting against Nick Saban in Alabama. A wise man once told me, you're not going to get rich betting against Alabama. So I'm going Alabama as well. About to move off the SEC West, but I'll ask you really quickly: two new head coaches, very intriguing head coaches with Leach at Mississippi State and Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. Obviously, Ole Miss on South Carolina's schedule. Who do you think has more success in year one, Leach or Kiffin?
In year one, I think it's going to be Ole Miss. I think just the way their schedule sets up. And honestly, looking at Vegas, these win totals, some of the best advice I've ever received. My dad, he said, they didn't build these $1 billion hotels and casinos in the middle of the desert out of nothing. And so when you look at that, and they're both their team win total is only 4. Mm-hmm. But when you look at like the actual odds and where like the juice is, I think it's even money for Ole Miss. It's like -115 for both. And you look at Mississippi State, for them to cover 4 wins this season, I think it's like +160. So the money's not in your favor. Mm-hmm. I think that in year one, Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, he's got a little bit more talent returning, a little bit more in place, especially with what he likes to do on offense. I think he will have a better and more consistent year one in regards to what their expectations are at Ole Miss. I think Mississippi State in year one is going to have a win like South Carolina had last year. I think they are, out of any team in the SEC, they are the most like ripe that like and poised to jump up and bite somebody when they're least expecting it. They get Georgia, they get Bama, obviously they get LSU and everyone else in the SEC West. KJ Costello is a really good quarterback, and with that Mike Leach offense, we've seen it 1,000 times. Like his record against top 25 teams, top 10 teams is abysmal overall, but he always seems to get one, like every couple of years or so.
Hey, at LSU week 1, never know. They're breaking in a whole new team. You never know.
Yeah, really.
Moving over to the East, I know we've talked about this before. Again, Florida, it seems like, has been the sexy pick all offseason, but now you look at the Gators' schedule, what they added, it does not do them any favors. It feels like the SEC was trying to almost throw the alley-oop up to Georgia, Alabama. I mean, when you see who Georgia added, Arkansas, Mississippi
State. They play each other.
I mean, come on.
Yeah,
ridiculous.
I love when people say that, and I get the sentiment, and this is something that we keep trying to harp on over and over and over again because first off, that's already built in. Okay?
Right.
Like everyone always would say, like Bama doesn't play anybody, all that kind of stuff. And I'll give you the best example out of this whole thing. 2016, right? Bama opens with USC. They beat them 52-6. USC finishes the year, wins the Rose Bowl, finishes number 3 in the country. Bama never plays anybody. They played them when they were unranked. Yeah. The following season, they open up with Florida State. Florida State's ranked number 3 in the country. It's the biggest preseason or biggest week 1 game of all time. Bama beats them 24-7, ruins Francois' life, and the rest of that season, they're done. Florida State finishes the season unranked. You have a team that they beat when they were unranked that finished 3rd, followed by, like literally sandwich back to back, a team that was started ranked number 3 and then finished unranked. And all we ever hear is, well, they don't play anybody.
Right.
So I think when you look at the picture as a whole, everyone wants to talk about how, the SEC kind of gave, Bama some cupcakes and there's no marquee matchup because everyone wanted to see that Bama-Florida matchup. The highest ranked matchup in the SEC for the entire season is Bama-Georgia. That's already on the schedule.
Right.
So when you look at it, the schedule as a whole, who else could they have added? And I think –
well, no, and I agree. I think everybody's schedule is hard this year. I mean, listen, I'm someone I can say this, and listen, Gamecock fans might not like that I'm saying this, but I'm even someone as a South Carolina fan that, listen, we know the ACC sucks, but I get so tired of hearing about Clemson's schedule. It's like, bro, they are a good football team.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care who they play. They're really, really, really good. I had a buddy of mine the other day, and again, I hate Clemson with every fiber of my being, but he was trying to justify, even if Clemson goes undefeated, they shouldn't be in the college football playoff. And I'm like, dude, come on. Look at the players on their roster. Like, you have to be able to look. You have to be able to look a little bit deeper. So, I mean, I hate Georgia. So that's probably why I'm saying that. But I agree with you. Everybody's schedule. I mean, you're pretty much playing everybody in the conference anyway.
Right. I mean, there's 13 possible games
you can't hide
you
this
play.
year.
Right.
Yeah, you can't hide this year.
13 possible teams you could have played, and you're playing 10 of them. And I tell you what, this is people don't want to hear this, but I'm right about this, and I don't care how that sounds. People don't want to see Bama play somebody. They want to see Alabama lose. And that's just like, once we can all start admitting that, I think, there is something to be said for – I said the SEC would do this early on. Like, as soon as I heard the rumors about Bama, Florida, I was like, there's no way the SEC is going to make their road to the college football playoff more difficult, especially in a year like this, by putting two of their contenders in an unnecessary game against each other. Like, there's just no way they would do that. And the Big Ten did the exact same thing, and I get it because, again, like, the bottom line is money and get people to the playoff. Either way, we're going to have an incredible season for football. I think when you look at Florida, and I will say that I know Florida was kind of at the forefront of why that schedule took so long to come out because they were not happy with the possibility of playing someone like Alabama. Florida's schedule, I wasn't really buying into Florida before that happened just because, listen, what Dan Mullen's done the first two seasons, I don't know why we're not talking about it enough. Because he's had 21 wins, 2 New Year's Six bowl games. 21 wins in 2 seasons. That's incredible. It's just incredible, especially with what he inherited from Jim McElwain. Florida, to me, I love what Kyle Trask was able to do as a game manager the year before. They have a lot of talent returning. They got a couple of new guys at receiver. I think they're really going to really impress and be some of the elite receivers in the entire conference throughout the country. I don't see how they beat Georgia. And I know, and I'm not just saying that because, well, it's been 3 years. Georgia fans love to bring that up on social media. Georgia lost 21 of 30 games to Florida in a 30-year stretch in my lifetime. And they won 3 in a row. And it's like,
all of a sudden.
Can't beat us, bro. Can't beat Kirby.
All of a sudden.
But right? So I will say, I think you still have to get by Georgia to win this division. I honestly think South Carolina has a really good chance. I wish that game was not being played in the Swamp. I wish it was being played in Williams-Brice. But I think South Carolina has a really good chance to upset a team like Florida and maybe sneak in to finish in second or third in that division. I hate to be bland and I hate to have the same predictions as everyone else, but that Georgia defense, I think, is going to be the best defense that we've seen in college football in the past decade. And statistically speaking, if they don't give up 20 points, and I'm looking at the schedule, they do play Bama, who has a very high-powered offense. Who else scores 20 to 25 points on that team?
Yeah, I mean, it took a defensive pick six and a couple of fortuitous bounces for everything for South Carolina to hit 20 last year against Georgia. So, I mean, when you think about that, for sure. No, I mean, listen, like I said, it's the boring pick, but listen, I think Georgia and Bama are in a league of their own, so that's who I'm picking. I'll tell you this. I think, actually, I've got Georgia winning the SEC.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm saying that because it's one of those things where I'm like, you feel like until Georgia – and listen, I mean, Nick Saban's never lost an assistant. That's a thing people love to bring up. So it's like it's almost like until it happens, why would you pick it? But it's like you're saying, man, like if that Georgia offense clicks with they've got Jamie Newman and JT Daniels to pick from.
And George Pickens.
Yeah, and you're like saying, and that defense is going to be unbelievable. I mean, if it doesn't happen this year, I don't know that it ever will. I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it.
That's fair, I think. I said this last year. I picked Georgia to beat Bama at the beginning of last season. I said at the beginning of last year I didn't think they would win the national championship because I thought Clemson was too good. But I thought that in 2020 Georgia would win the national championship, and it felt like it was coming. I think losing 9 starters on offense is difficult. I mean, it's very difficult. And the biggest issue, and people just love to hate on Saban about this, is the continuity as a staff. That's the biggest kind of thing that Kirby Smart's going to have to manage as a coach, because it's tough to replace an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator, and then those assistants and like those guys that are also good recruiters and all that kind of stuff, and like losing a guy like Sam Pittman on top of losing 9 starters. But Jake Fromm is, I mean, I don't know how PC we have to be on this show, but like he is
go ahead.
the most underwhelming fucking quarterback I've seen in the SEC. Like a hand job on a honeymoon, like level of underwhelming. It is unbelievable how mediocre he was. I just, I think anybody they bring in, either of these guys is an upgrade from Jake Fromm. And he took that team to a national championship. But if you are somebody that is, I don't think he should have lost his job to Justin Fields. But if you're a Georgia fan and you look at Justin Fields being a Heisman finalist, throwing 40 touchdowns and 1 interception, and then you look at what you had, this balding 20-year-old who's throwing out racial epithets on Twitter apparently now, it's like going almost undrafted by the Bills. I think that they're going to have an upgrade there. And I said this about Bama. This is when you could kind of start seeing like things change when Saban first got to Tuscaloosa. And it's exactly what's happening in Athens is you're not only getting these 5-star guys, these 4-star guys, and it's obviously made a difference, right? Like Georgia's starting out in the top 5 in the preseason poll for the 3rd straight year under Kirby Smart. Before he got there, they'd only done that 3 times in their program history, right? So he's been able to bring in a lot of elite recruits and elite talent, and it's obviously showed, especially on defense, where he has his hand over that defense all the time, and they've been lights out. They've been absolutely lights out. They gave up 2 rushing touchdowns all last year, neither one of them to a running back, and they didn't give up one until November when they played Auburn. So
crazy.
I think that when you look at JT Daniels, I'd say he's the starter. I think Newman will be, but Daniels as a 5-star quarterback, throwing to the number 1 receiver coming out of high school, George Pickens, and then handing off to the number 1 running back in the country, Zamir White, coming out of high school, and he's being blocked for on his blind side by the number 1 offensive tackle, and like just 5 stars everywhere. It's crazy. And you look at the other side of that on defense, and you're like, this defensive end was the number 1 JUCO player in the country. The other guy was the number 1 high school player in the country. I mean, they had 5 kids that were not just the number 1 player at their position, but the number 1 player in their state as well. To recruiting cycles ago. It's just what he's doing. It's going to pay off. I don't know if it's this year because Bama's going to be, I think, scary again. And I think they're going to they return 9 of 10 coaches, which I think is a huge deal. And when you look at that defense, what happened last year, I know what happened against Auburn. I know what happened against LSU. Man, they had 6 starters out going to the last game. And I think if they can stay healthy, they could beat Georgia, but I wouldn't bet on Bama beating Georgia twice. I like that pick.